Incali cuatlique chalchi huitlique huichimalma atotonali ejecal tlali tlet. Eres Dios.
Dios. Thank you for drawing your attention to this scenario. Thank you for coming out to this event. Thank you to the people that invited us. Hello? Can you hear me? No. Check, it's not on. Yeah? Yeah. Okay. So, thank you so much for being so attentive. This is just our way of praying, our way of giving our seeds to this event. Thank you for everyone that's honoring these women from all over the world, for fighting, for struggling, for surviving, because in the end, we are all survivals, even though we're in another world where our spirit has gone from our body, but we still stand strong. We're still here in community. Thank you so much once again to the coordinators, to Juan, to everyone that was involved. And we just want to invite you guys to close with us if you feel comfortable. We're just going to face different directions, just closing it off, giving thanks for allowing us to step into this ground, for allowing us to pray with you guys, and just like move in the rotation that we're moving, and that will be our official close. Thank you so much.
Sí, sí. Queremos invitar a la comunidad que está aquí presente a que los que quieran integrarse a este grupo o venir a los ensayos. Estamos en Manhattan, en la 104 y Lexington. Um, no discriminamos a nadie, no discriminamos edad, color, ni sexo y ni religión tampoco. Esto es la danza azteca chichimeca de México y pues lo que solamente hacemos nosotros es siempre ser mejor cada día. Entonces, los que quieran más información, ahí estamos. Gracias.
I'm just going to quickly translate. We're just wanting to invite whoever will like to join and learn more about our roots, our culture. You're welcome to. We hold our practices here in the city on 104th. If you are interested or just curious, feel free to reach out to us, walk up to us, and ask any questions. Thank you.
Is it working now? Maybe? Kinda. So I'll ask again, how's everybody doing? Good. So my name is Claudia de la Cruz. Welcome to the People's Forum. How many of you have already been to the People's Forum? Oh, that's good. So we're fam, right? So you all know I'm from the Bronx, right? All right. And I'm part of the hip hop culture. And there's something that we call the cipher. You know, when people get together and get closer, I want us to get closer. For one simple reason, we're going to have folks that are going to be coming in throughout the day. It's a long day. Thank you so much for being the early comers to church, you know, because it's Sunday morning. If you haven't gotten breakfast, there's breakfast on the side. There's coffee that's going to be brewing the whole day. We want to thank you and again welcome you to the People's Forum, an incubator for the movement, for the working class. Our desire is that this space is a space of convergence, of building, of moving forward together for our people, the poor and dispossessed of the world. So we are here, November 25th, El Día de la No Violencia contra la Mujer, the Day of No Violence Against Women, the 37th commemoration. And it is unfortunate that we have to commemorate such event. In 1981, in the Latina or Latin American feminist encounter, there were women who came together and acknowledged and honored the life of Las Hermanas Mirabal, who fought against the dictatorship in the Dominican Republic and were killed for believing and fighting for democracy. Fast forward, Brazil. Fast forward, Honduras. And a lot of places around the world, unfortunately, have had the misfortune of having to fight for democracy and freedom. And so we are here to commemorate, but also to reaffirm our commitment to continue to struggle towards liberation, towards democracy. And so I am very, very happy to introduce our first panel, which is going to be on state violence and gender. And I have the pleasure of introducing my sister friend who I've known for several years. I'm not going to tell you how much because then you're going to start counting. And then you're going to figure it out. So if y'all just want to know, just holler and ask me. I might tell you the truth. But I want to introduce Corinna Garcia, who I've had the pleasure of working alongside for a long time. She is an educator, an organizer, a mama, one of the best little, signatures in our lives. She's a mama and a revolutionary, which is also a very, very, very huge honor to say that Corinna Garcia is a comrade of mine, an organizer in El Barrio, an internationalist. Can I say it? And a socialist. Right? Because this space is openly anti-capitalist, anti-imperial, and anti-patriarchal. So we got to say what we're for, right? So she is a socialist, and I'm very, very happy to have her as a comrade. Corinna Garcia is going to be the moderator for this panel. And if you want to meet Tati, you got to go through me, and then, and then Corinna. But Tati's with the daddy over there, a red diaper baby. Corinna.
Wow, qué bienvenida. Oh my God. Pues I feel very honored to be here with everybody today. So my baby just turned 4 months, so this has been, a beautiful struggle. But it's nice to, to know that we stand on the shoulders of so many giants, so many women who fought. And that Tati is not just part of ours, not just me and Ben's. She belongs to our whole community, and that she has to think bigger than the things in her neighborhood, the people around her. Not that that's not important. It's very important. But she has to see herself as part of all the different struggles, regardless of whether or not she's facing them. I feel that that's like the most important thing that I can try to give to her, is to not isolate her from her community, and not let, and I know this is hard because it was hard this morning to get out of the house, but to not let motherhood just isolate me in my house, but to try to stay connected to the movement as much as possible. And maybe it might look a little bit different, but to just not allow the isolation that crushes so many people in our communities from continuing to happen. So to stay involved, to stay connected, and to keep building with my community. So I'm really honored to be here with all of you. Thank you. So I prepared a few notes. I was thinking a lot about, the context that we're having this forum here, and what a wonderful space to have, that Claudia and all the comrades have been able to build this beautiful space, that we're able to connect our movements and have indigenous dancers and singers sharing their culture, and a whole day of panels and all the different things that the People's Forum is offering to our communities. And this is going to be a center of New York City, because we have people in here from Brooklyn, we got people in here from Queens, we got people from the Bronx. Staten Island? No, it's too far. It's too hard. It's too hard. Okay. But we got a lot of people. We got a lot of representation of the boroughs. Philly, and North Carolina. Wow. Anybody else want to beat that? Ooh, West Coast? Okay, California, Long Beach. Yeah. Okay. So thinking about our national context, and of course, in this moment, almost everything seems urgent in this country. Everything seems urgent in this country. We have a president who is like a sexual assaulter. We have a new Supreme Court judge who is basically a rapist. We have the troops being sent to the border. We have this national context of this increasing rise of these far-right, racist, reactionary people. And how are we going to confront them, and who's going to confront them? And thankfully, we're not starting from zero. We're building upon all those generations of fighters who have been organizing their communities, and we're taking lessons from them. That's one of the things that I so appreciate about the People's Forum, is that it's not just about what's happening in the United States, but it's about connecting all of the different struggles and the victories. How have our people turned things around? How have our people organized to win, to fight back against the oppressors who are trying to break down our people, humiliating us on every turn? How have our people been able to fight against that? And we've been able to bring together lots of people from lots of communities to take those lessons. And so that's going to be the purpose of this panel, is to speak to this unique group of organizers, right? Because this panelist is very unique in that sense, in that lots of people can talk about the problems, and everybody knows about the problems, and they're facing these problems, but few people can look for solutions. and to provide a strategy and to share the lessons of organizing. And that's what we want to get out of this panel. And so I'm going to ask questions of the panelists to share about the work that they've been doing, of course, the practical day-to-day work that is being an organizer, right? Because it's not just about being able to give a speech. It's about being able to be called on and to respond to the daily things that are happening in your communities, which we know are ugly and hard, right? From domestic violence to detention and mass incarceration, police brutality, all these different things are hard to respond to in the moment. And how do you do it? So we want to try to pull out those lessons from this unique panel of organizers and to share a strategy, right? We're looking forward also and saying, how can we grow more? What can we do? How can we involve ourselves more? What's been working? What can we take from our sisters and brothers in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, all throughout the world where people have been fighting oppression? What can we learn from them, and how can we advance the struggle? So with that, I want to introduce our panelists. The last thing I just wanted to say about the international context, which I think is very, very important, and Claudia mentioned Berta Caceres, Marielle Franco. You know, this rising far right, these fascistic right-wing movements, they've been growing by really managing, what they've been doing is they've been managing the crisis and the contradictions of capitalism and imperialism. And really what they've been doing is they've been directing the hatred and violence that comes from those systems. And they've been directing that towards the most vulnerable, oppressed sectors of our communities. And they've been doing that by telling the deteriorating middle classes, of which men in particular, that they can rebuild their power, that they can rebuild their position, that they can rebuild their nation and their manhood by turning the clock backwards. They've been redirecting all of the anger and frustration and humiliation that they've seen as a result of capitalism and imperialism, redirecting that hatred towards poor people, women of color, LGBTQ people, immigrants, and telling them that the way that they can restore their manhood, their nation, themselves, is by stepping on all of those peoples and turning the clock backwards, redirecting and taking back all those hard-fought rights that we won. By turning the clock backwards, they think that that's the way that they're going to come back. But it's not. So today we're going to, I wanted to share also that as we're meeting, there's also 25 cities around the country that are organizing solidarity actions for the Refugee Caravan. The Refugee Caravan, as we all know, is a consequence of U.S. imperialism abroad, right? And people that are fleeing that crisis, that are walking day after day with their children, carrying with them the spirit of Berta Caceres, who of course was killed with the complicity of the Obama administration, and in particular, Hillary Clinton. So I want to take a moment to all of us, even though we're here in this action that's an indoor forum, to show our solidarity with all those people who are taking actions outside, in solidarity with the Refugee Caravan. If people could stand up if you feel comfortable, I want to take a moment to connect with our comrades who are showing solidarity. So I want you to repeat after me. La lucha obrera no tiene fronteras. La lucha obrera no tiene fronteras. All right. And now we're going to say it one more time. We're going to say it like we had breakfast and we're feeling strong and we got so much energy. We're going to say it so loud in Midtown so that all the tourists in these bougie hotels can hear that there are people here who care more about, who have more solidarity with those comrades, those people who are coming across the nation than we do with the rich billionaire bankers, with Wall Street, that we have more in common with them than we do with any of those people and those organizations that try to oppress us. So one more time, nice and loud. La lucha obrera no tiene frontera. La lucha obrera no tiene frontera. Eso, muchas gracias. Thank you very much. All right. Okay, so with that, I want to go ahead and bring in our panel. Can I have Alejandra Pablo step to the mic, por favor? Let's give her a nice round of applause. All right. We also have Ngozi Alston. All right. Let's give her a round of applause. And Ash Stevens, where you at? All right. Okay, so welcome. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to start by asking just a general introductory question about what it is that folks are doing right now, knowing that people have done a lot, but we just want this to be kind of the where we start off the conversation. And so I have a few questions for our panelists, and then we're going to open it up to the whole room to give comments, to ask questions, to add to the conversation. Of course, we're trying to draw on the lessons and the strategies that are working and what we can do to keep building our movements. So I think I'm gonna start with Ale. If Ale could just say a couple words, not a couple words, some bullet points maybe about the work that you're doing on the ground, and then we'll kind of go through our panel, and then we'll ask another round of questions.
Hi everyone. Is it on? Hola, buenos días. Yeah, thank you for opening up the space, everyone who did open it up. I was already crying. My son is in Cancer, Gemini rising, Taurus moon. So I'm having all the feels all the time. So where's the Kleenex? I need Kleenex at all times. But today, and I don't know how true this is, and I feel like it is probably true, and I should have done my diligence of like really looking into it before saying something. But I saw something on Facebook today, or was it last night, about the woman in Mexico, one of the immigrant people coming from Honduras that complained about the beans, the frijoles, and now she's missing. So I'm just like, because that'd be me, you know? Like, also, yeah, we need more food. Like, you know, we need better food than beans. Like, the fuck? And now she's missing, you know? And it's just like, it really weighed heavy this morning on me. And I'm just like, when we speak out, just by being mujeres, you know, and speaking out and rebelling and just saying, no, we want more, is just, you know, we're doomed to, like, disappear and be murdered, and that shit is scary. And that happened in Mexico, right, where I'm from and where I might be deported to, right? So it's just as important as I'm fighting here right now to change shit for us here. It's like how important it is for me to be advocating for my people in Mexico as well, and to hopefully make it better if I do ever have to leave. If I ever had to leave, it would be illegal because I ain't signing shit, y'all. But thank you, Corinna, for inviting me, and Sierra, I don't know where she's at, but everybody who is just super supportive of my situation. I am an activist, a reproductive justice and immigrant rights activist, and I've been fighting my deportation case for about 8 years now, organizing really strong against it for about 5. And right now I'm basically focusing on my own deportation defense campaign. I actually go to my individual political asylum hearing on the 11th of December. So right now I'm in the works of preparing to testify and talk about my criminal record. So that's really tough, and that's something that I still have to do, even though I've been doing this work and defending my own self, right, and talking about, you know, labels that the government has given us and all of this stuff, and I still have this shame, right? So there's just a lot of work that we have to do. You know, a lot of self-hate that they've taught me, right? So it's like I'm learning a lot of shit. So I don't have a job right now. Last time I was detained, I don't know how much y'all know, but like I was detained for protesting at a DHS office. And even though there was no jurisdiction for this ICE cop to arrest me, I still had, when I went to check in Arizona, I still had to go back to prison again. So I went to immigration prison again for no damn reason, because those charges were already dropped. And again, we had to fight for a bond just to get out and be home, which is really just wild, right? But I don't have a job now, so I've been focusing a lot of my storytelling and like, what do I do, right, with my life now that I can't work, but still gotta sustain myself. Nothing changes, right? Even though this cop interrupted everything, this system interrupted my whole life, nothing changed. Rent still gotta be paid. I still gotta eat, right? I still have to organize for liberation, right? So that's what I've been up to, focusing on a lot of different kinds of storytelling now, which is like some wealth that I like encountered through all of this chaos in my life. So I'm really excited about being able to do some storytelling in different ways. So that's what I've been working on right now. Focusing on definitely convening a lot of people who are facing deportation and who have been incarcerated and have been criminalized, and in this pipeline of like home and school and work to prison, right? Whether it's immigration or not, I've been trying to work with folks. Let's just call it what it is: immigration, prison. We're not better than folks that are in prisons by calling it detention centers, right? This is the same shit and even worse, right? Because in detention centers we sit idle. They don't want to give us any education. There is no vocational skills. There's just nothing, right? So right now, just focusing on how to highlight, how to abolish ICE, right? Because we could do this. So yeah, that's what I've been working on. I don't want to take up more time. I know we'll talk a little bit more, but my pronouns are she and they.
Thanks, Ale.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Ngozi. I'm the organizing co-chair of BYP 100. And some of the work we've been doing recently. For those of you who don't know, BYP 100 is an organization full of 18 to 35-year-olds, Black people, dedicated to fighting for Black liberation through a Black queer feminist lens, which means we focus on centering the most marginalized of folks in our community to make sure that their voices are heard and that they're the ones being uplifted. So a few things we've been working on lately are Say Her Name. We do Say Her Name Week of Action every year, and we're now launching next year a Keep Her Safe campaign, focusing on how to protect Black women, girls, and femmes, because clearly every day we're being murdered, basically, in the streets. And last week, a couple weeks ago, there was Aisha Frazier, who was murdered by the judge, her ex-husband, even though he'd been in prison for a couple months, served time for domestic violence, and he was out less than 3 years later. Less than 3 years later, he ended up killing her. So what does it mean to not have Black women's lives valued when we are in harm's way? So that's some of the work that we do around Say Her Name. We also do work on decriminalizing sex work. Currently, our New York chapter and DC chapter are working on policy to figure out how to decriminalize sex work, because Black women and femmes especially shouldn't be criminalized for trying to, make a living for their families, especially when they're typically pushed out of traditional 9-to-5 jobs. I think that's good for now.
Thank you.
Hi, y'all. Hello? Cool, thanks. Hi, I'm Ash. I'm not sure that this is true. I'm sort of new to New York. I've been here 2 years now. So I've been doing a lot of work with folks, including one of my mentors, Miriam Kaba, who couldn't be here. Thankfully, I'm here with y'all. Around support work for folks who have been criminalized for defending themselves from like domestic violence, sexual assault, sexual violence situations. And so doing that work in Chicago, I was part of a crew of folks that organized for Marissa Alexander, who folks I'm sure know the name of, was in Florida. She defended herself. She was facing like 20 years. That went up to 60 years because of the DA there. She subsequently took a plea and was released. So through folks in that org, also folks in California, doing a lot of work around deportation work, and folks nationally, the group Survived and Punished was formed. And so as a collective, we're an abolitionist collective. We work to decriminalize efforts around people who, not only women, but particularly women, right, because of the way that like gender violence shows itself, who are criminalized for defense, but also GNC folks, queer and trans people in particular, who also oftentimes we have to defend ourselves from violence. We also work for, we also do projects in order to further work for the abolishment of like police, prisons, again, deportation work. And we also do a lot of individual, what we call sort of like prisoner support work. So we do like defense campaign work. There's a few folks we're working with right now. One woman, her name is Nikki Adamondo. She's from New Jersey. She was in jail for a while, has subsequently now been released because we've been able to raise bail money for her, but now she needs to be able to pay legal fees. So part of our support work involves like individual cases, but also involves larger cases. until right now, the larger and the bigger work is our mass commutations project we're working on right now. I don't know, maybe later I'll get into more specifics, but Governor Cuomo can, release people at any time for anything. He has that executive power. He doesn't exercise it. He's exercised it around 163 times previously. And usually he does that around this time, around like holidays or some weird, terrible sort of like charity act when he could do it whenever he wanted to. So right now we're amping up that campaign, getting names for that list, and I can talk a little bit more about like how we've been able to do that. But yeah, so the point of that being to call to action him to be able to free folks who are inside for self-defense. So they defended themselves from partners or, whoever, police, whatever, because of crimes based on gender and sexuality and so forth. So, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Okay. Hello. So my next question then for Ale, and we'll kind of come back and forth and just, people can speak up and conversate with each other too. So a few months ago, there was a prison strike commemorating Black August. And I was struck by the resurgence of organizing and collective action from both prisoners in correctional facilities and, as you said, Ale, immigrants in immigration prisons, right, as well, or detention centers as well. And all of these people found a way to stop business as usual during this hunger strike. And of course, as we all know, like that requires so much bravery, so much courage to take actions right under the boot of these prison guards, of these horrible conditions that we've heard about in these both detention centers and in prisons. And so one of the things that I really always admired about Ale, and that we've seen through the heroism of the organizing that was happening there in those prisons, is Ale, when she was detained for 2 years in the immigration prison, she was organizing with other women, and she was, assisting them in doing different classes. She also met different immigrant rights organizers who had themselves done civil disobedience to get into those centers to find out what the conditions were like and what was happening. So also an incredible amount of courageousness from those activists. And so this brought to question, like, what is the role of women who are incarcerated women, not only within that are currently in prisons, but also when they come out of prisons, because clearly they are victims of the state, right? But they're not just victims, right? They're also organizers. They're also leaders. They're also taking extremely heroic acts and organizing the people around them. And so I wanted to see if Ale could sort of speak to that through her experience, and then, the organizing that you're doing around detention centers, prisons, et cetera.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I was detained once before in Eloy Detention Center, one of the worst immigration prisons, private prisons in the country. And this I found out my second time around. I thought they were all bad and all disgusting, but actually CCA in Eloy has managed to deteriorate in so many ways this time around, the second time that I came. But from the first time, it was my first time being detained. It was like, whoa, I am a legal permanent resident. What's going on? Why do you have your hands on me, right? And it's like, no, actually, you have no rights as a citizen. You weren't born here, so we can take away your resident card at any time. So that was something that I learned when I was actually in handcuffs, on probation on my 5th month. Just regular closed agents come in and say you're being deported. It didn't turn out to be like that. I actually ended up spending 2 years fighting. Within those 2 years, I lost my resident card. There was a lot of different applications that I did. My file is like super big, and they had to carry it, and it's just an ordeal. But because I fought really hard, and a lot of us are fighting really, really, really hard right now. So during that time, towards the end of my 2 years there, for one, I was always fasting. It was a transformation time for me. So I personally used that time to really transform myself, learn about all kinds of different religions, and I was really keeping myself busy, teaching other folks, learning with them, struggles from their countries. We just had a lot of pláticas when we were in there. So I started to really wake up in there. But then folks who, like Corinna mentioned, we're doing a strategic, we're coming in to organize and help the women. I was there. I was actually on my way to lunch, but we were actually stopped before I actually made it, but we had heard why the whole facility was locked down. A young person got up on one of the stools at lunch and just kind of let them know, we're here with support, we're here to advocate for conditions in here, we're gonna ask for asylum, and kind of started letting the people know. Automatically the facility shut down. And I don't remember how long we were shut down for, but there was no more opportunity for us to talk to the women, and actually nobody was able to talk to each other anymore, because what we did was started to write letters to each other too. We knew what was happening, because at the same time we watched TV, right? So we're kind of seeing what's happening, the little bit that the media lets us know, right, while we're in there. And then at this time, my brother had just came back from the war. He was in Kuwait, and it was just difficult for me to know what he was feeling, but I guess the whole time when he was finishing his first term, he was like, wait, why is my sister still in detention? A lot of my family, we have a lot of privilege, and a lot of us have documentation. My mom is a citizen, always has been. So for us, it was just like, oh, she's gonna come out, right? This is just another form of prison. She smoked weed, she should be in there for a little bit. That's how my family thought, for real. Like, they actually told everybody I was backpacking through Europe, y'all. So much shame within, but anyways, that really started to wake us all up, right? But we started getting locked down every day. We started getting food in styrofoam cups served to ourselves every day and asked, are you eating? Yes or no. So they were starting to punish everybody who was joining this strike. And I remember when the Dreamer Nines came, I was just like, okay, I'm totally in, but I don't want to be sitting in these circles because they're going to think I'm organizing this, because I was always just complaining, right? I had a really good reputation, I had a really good kind of relationship with some ICE officers there, the warden, a lot of people. There's a few of us, there's probably like 50 women out of the 500 women usually that speak English, really. So it's like, most of us are in this pod, we're in khakis or blue, so they separate you by levels as well. Most of the women are in green, because they just did some civil infractions. So they definitely didn't put the Dreamers 9 in solitary confinement where we were at, because we would have definitely joined them, right? A lot of us were always in trouble because we were talking shit, we knew the booklet, we read it, we spoke English, we defended our rights more. So I had always been, stepping up and pushing back, and they always knew me, right? The ICE officers would come in and know that I was gonna say something all the time. So during this time, I was like, I don't wanna be seen as the organizer, right? So I'm gonna be moving real low key. Still, Chief of Security would directly come, they would listen to my calls, they would interrupt my calls, they would come to my visits. My brother started calling me and just putting reporters on the phone. So during this time, there was people doing actions outside all the time, so that's why we were locked down. On top of the fact that the women were doing hunger strikes inside and we were joining them, there was a lot of media pressure from outside. So we weren't allowed to go outside, get our food, none of that. That happened for like around 2 to 3 weeks. And that's when my brother started coming back. I saw my brother like on the Congressman Grijalva's office my brother and I had never known nothing about none of this, right? But he came back seeing what was happening in the political situation. So he started just doing what everybody was doing. So he went to the congressman and sat there with my family and my grandma. Everybody's like, Pablo's, you're on TV, now we're gonna be locked down, right? Because that's what happened. So like a lot of the women were supportive, but at the same time, it's like, we don't wanna be more locked down. Like we don't, and I'm like, y'all. So it was always a struggle being like, we're already locked down. One time I was working in the kitchen and we had to, the men wouldn't let us eat a second tray. So the thing about it is in prisons is just that like it's made for men technically. It's made for all of us to control all of us, but also like it's just much tougher for women because of gender, right? The abuse, all of that. I mean, we hardly get any health care. So on top of like, reproductive health care, that's just non-existent basically. So for women, it's just, that much tougher we're inside. So a lot of the folks inside, sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought because now I'm thinking about prisons. But we started getting together and they would come and Chief of Security would ask you, like, are you eating? And the women would be like, yeah, we are. But they weren't eating. So it was like, no, y'all, we have to talk, like, eat, but say you didn't eat, right? Like, that's the way we're going to have to be able to support. And da-da-da-da. But it was all these tactics, right, of like really repressing us and fear of like fighting back. And it was really tough. In CCA and these private prisons, there's no transparency, no oversight, right? We know that now Jeff Sessions, the ex-Attorney General, had said we're not going to investigate DHS and ICE. So that's why when I went back inside this time, like I saw exactly what that did. When he like said to the public, to the world, like, we're not investigating ICE, they went rogue. And they started like really like treating us literally with like less healthcare than what we already had, right? Not even a carbon copy for us to document any complaints. It was really sick this time around. And the abuse just keeps getting higher and higher. So the fact that we're talking about detention centers, I mean, look at the shirt that I'm wearing. I'm from Arizona. I didn't shout out Arizona when you were asking who was in here. So I'm from Arizona, ground zero in a lot of ways. And a Border Patrol agent just shot somebody over the border, y'all. Shot somebody, a 16-year-old kid, and he just got found innocent on involuntary manslaughter. So Arizona, Tucson right now is really going through that. But I think it's really important again to talk about how when we come out, nothing is changing, right? Nothing is changing. If women are still locked up, I'm still affected. And also, like I said, I came back out, completely transformed my life, in quote unquote, right? Doing everything that I thought would like make them stop chasing me, and I still ended up again in detention center. Again, for speaking up, for advocating for myself. Regardless if they had the right to do this or not, I still had to go there. I still had to be detained again and kidnapped in essence. So yeah.
All right. Thank you, Ale. We'll keep coming around too. There's a lot. There's just so much, right? So my next question is for Ngozi. So you talked about some of the work that you've done around domestic violence, and you know, as many people know, like domestic violence happened for thousands of years, and it wasn't even until like the 60s and 70s women's movement, right, that domestic violence even became a term. So that's just like one example of just how rampant the abuse of women has been just historically. And so I know in the work that you were talking about in Ngozi with domestic violence, the other issue that we face a lot in our communities, and this is the Black community, immigrant community, Latino community, like, is that when the cops come in, they can very often make a bad situation worse. And so especially women of color are stuck in this situation many times, right, where you're in between a rock and a hard place. It's like, well, what do? You want to end what's happening in your situation, but at the same time, you know that if you call the police, well, then everybody might just end up dead. So can you now talk about, I know it's a hard question, can you talk about your organizing efforts and how you all have been able to navigate these difficult situations?
So we're very anti-police. And so when you do have DV situations, it's really hard, especially like organizing in communities, Black communities, and telling them don't call the police. That's hard because, yeah, we all understand, like, most of us don't trust the police. However, some people would still prefer that police presence and to call them. So we're offering alternatives to calling the police. We have workshops with some night shift developments, and we're in there saying, like, hey, here's some community accountability practices. Talk to your neighbors, having intergenerational workshops. Some elders might call the cops in a NYCHA residence because kids are playing loud music, not understanding that if the cops come there and maybe find some reason to like arrest a kid, they might not be able to return to that NYCHA property because of permanent exclusion in NYCHA housing, right? So like there are all these things and like consequences to calling the police that a lot of people don't even think about. And yes, police exacerbate 9 out of 10 times like every situation when you call them. So what does it look like to have a world without police? What does it look like to depend on one another instead of this force, this state that is only going to fuck your life up even more than they already have? That's some of the things that we're thinking about and working on in our organizing, because the cops don't help us out. They make everything worse. And so what does community accountability look like to one another? And being interested and committed to that work as well is really important to us.
Thank you. Can I add something? Just speaking about that, it's like also like how do we talk about policing and surveillance like with our families? Because like the work, yeah, as far as just, I also as an organizer, as somebody who's living this shit, right, that like literally is like, I don't know if I'm gonna be here, I don't know when I'm gonna have to start making plans to leave this country, this only country that, like that I've ever been in, right, where all my family's at. So it's like really important to like bring in our families, right? And we always know that it's the toughest to talk to our families about these things, right? But you know, I don't have a job right now, so I'd be like, talking to my family a lot, a lot now. And I'm just like, nah, you know what? Like, I was away for 3 years working in DC, I'm back now, and if I do this work and I try to bring everybody in and I'm not trying to bring y'all in, like, what's the point of it, right? So I've been having these conversations, and like, these police conversations are really, 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 really tough. And we talk about just, like, I mean, because prisons and it's the same, prisons and policing, right? There's just police and prison, whatever. But like, it's a form of control. Like, so even if we haven't been in prison, we're scared. We don't want to go there, right? Y'all want to go to prison? No, right? So it's like this form of like, you know, controlling everybody, making sure that you know that you're being watched and all of this, right? So like, having these tough ass conversations, like my mom the other day was like, I mean, there has to be a law we can put in place for cops to stop killing us, right? And somebody who doesn't know a lot, right? Is barely getting politicized. And I'm just like, Mom, that's so interesting that being from Mexico, you would say that some sort of government would protect you. You know, I was like, that's so interesting. And I was like, decolonizar, descolonizar, I said decolonize, and I just left it at that. And she just started like bringing up this, you know, cop situation a lot, you know, and then came to an action and then saw these cops act all wild and like, you know, whatever. But like, it just, that's my mom's personal path. My other family members don't want to like talk about it, right? They don't want to know. They're just, and they live in so much in fear. But doing this work, what does it look like with our families, right? Like, they would call the cops. My tia would call the cops on me. And like, one more thing that I want to say is like as Black and Latinx communities, like, our crimes are already illegalized, right? Like, what we do is already illegal. Like, if a white person comes to a courtroom, they're already like, no way, this person is not in our heads defined as a criminal. So we let these people go off, or they get 10 years probation for killing somebody instead of going to jail, right? So all of these things. So thinking about like crime, who defines what crime is also, right? The people in power. Why us, all of the things that we are as mujeres are just criminalized, period. Like, besides the point that I don't want a mother right now, like, I don't want to get pregnant because then y'all start criminalizing me for just being pregnant, for just driving and having, you know, just whatever. So it's just like really tough to just be a mujer and then be a mujer who's anti-police at all times. Like, for me to wear this shirt, people look at me wild. Like, when I see somebody looking, a young comrade over there was like videotaping me, I'm like, are you the police? So everything now is just like, I feel being censored all the time. When I went back into prison again, and I thought I'm like this tough ass person and blah, blah, blah. No, I was hella scared inside again. Hella scared. They were like, you can't have this hashtag Olive versus ICE because they're going to keep you in there. And I'm like, but isn't that what it says on my paperwork? Like Alejandra versus the Department of Homeland Security, right? So it's just all these tactics to keep us fucking silent and stuff because they're scared of women. They're just scared of us, and it's, yeah. So shout outs to all, right, shout outs to just everybody who does like direct anti-police work and who say out loud, we are anti-police because we are anti-prison and we're anti-fascist.
Thanks, Ale. So I guess on that question for Ash, on the question of being anti-police and the abolitionist movement that we hear is happening more and more, and people are talking about it in terms of the movement. I don't know if I can. All right, sorry. See, I was hoping that you could speak to, like, what is your take on that question? Because I know that, you know, for example, like thinking about, well, the cops are killing entire communities, right? Like, they don't stop whether it could be a child, it could be a woman, it could be, you know, it's just relentless. And so then the question about exactly what Ale's family members were asking, like, well, this cop should go to prison, right? And if when we're organizing in our communities, and I know you all have faced this too, I want you to kind of share about it. I know one of the difficult questions that I hear, and that honestly I want you to tell me because I have problems with it as well. It's like when Laquan Mcdonald's killer finally went to jail, it was like, yes, and people like, I feel that's the question about abolition that I struggle with personally, because I feel like there is a place in prison for killer cops. And while I understand, like, we're looking at something forward-looking and thinking about beyond, like, what is beyond these prisons, it's like I don't want our people going to jail, but at the same time, I think these killer cops should go to jail. And so many of our people are killed for nothing, or are put in jail for nothing, right? For drug offenses, nothing. But this is the question that I want you to talk about. Like, how do you navigate that? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I want to make sure I understand. So I guess maybe the tension in your example between, I guess, like, what justice is currently and, like, maybe what we want justice to be and want it to look like. So, like, when a cop is arrested, like, for me, that's not justice, right? Because policing, surveillance, and prison still exist. So that's not fully justice. Also, that can never undo the harm and the violence experienced by that person who is now gone, their family, their community, et cetera, right? Like, so that doesn't feel like justice to me. And under the current systems in which we live in, right, like, people are often wanting people to be adjudicated for those killings, assassinations, harms, and so, like, that's the system we live in. Is that, like, sort of the tension, right?
I think that is a question,
Yeah.
and I think, like, what you're saying is well taken about, like, it's not justice when because justice is not gonna, that doesn't bring your child back, right? But when the community has this demand about this, somebody needs to pay for this. Somebody needs to go to jail for this. Like, how do you, as abolitionists, this is what I struggle with. What do you tell the families when they want justice in this system, or they want something right now? Like, how do you? What do you tell those families that are fighting for that now?
Yeah, I think that's hard. And I think the both of you were speaking to like even the calling the police question, right? I think throughout what I've learned is, like, I don't ever tell someone who's, like, experiencing, like, especially, like, currently in intense sort of, like, harm to not call the police when that's the thing that they feel secure in. My conversations I've learned about with people is to talk about a framework of, like, no self to defend that I have learned, right? Like, so, like, in particular, that framework comes around an understanding of, like, black women not having any personhood to be able to defend themselves through the state, because what happens when you do that, right, like, you take action against someone who's harming you, right, like, you're then criminalized, incarcerated for that, right? Like, so you're not actually seen as a person through the state, so you can't actually do that. But if you are, if you are experiencing some sort of harm, I personally don't ever tell someone not to call. I have conversations with people about, like, what could happen, what has happened, what historically will happen, especially if you are a person of color, especially a woman or a GNC person of color, right? Like, what can happen? Because I think we are building very many different types of versions of the world we want to see, and a lot of those, I think, aren't as far-reaching yet as we would like them to be. They don't exist, I guess, robustly as we want them to be, and our work is trying to make that possible, and the police are still around, even though I don't want them to be around, right? And for some people, that is what they feel comfortable. So if someone is, like, currently knocking on somebody's door, threatening to harm them and kill them, for me to say, like, don't call the police in this moment, no. I want to be like, who are your people? How can you possibly be removed from the situation? How can we hopefully build a plan with you for, like, support and all kind of stuff? How can we also build a plan for, like, accountability, like you were talking about, Ngozi, for that person who's causing the harm? But I think you're right. I think it is a tension, and I think it is hard. I don't have a perfectly clear answer. I do think, though, that our tactics and the strategies that we are using to make, in the Angela Davis way, right, like prison surveillance policing, like, obsolete. I think we're all doing that work. I think it is hard, though, to tell someone who's facing direct harm to not do that, and I don't think you have to do one or the other. I think we can do both of those things. And I think people want to sort of, like, bifurcate those, like, you got to be so down with this, or you got to be so down with that. And I just personally don't believe that, because people don't live lives that way. We are impacted by the state at all times, right? You worried about someone filming you, and, like, what that can do, like, is a real thing. And that is happening at the same time that you're like, fuck you, cops, right? Like, so, like, those things are happening simultaneously. And so the tension is real, and so, yeah, I'm curious on what you all are going to say.
Yeah, please. You want to add to it, and go
yeah, if I could just hop in for a minute. So you mentioned the Laquan Mcdonald verdict happening, and I think something that a lot of folks were disappointed, and I was with some Chicago comrades at the time the verdict was being, like, live streamed, and knowing how some of them were on the front lines and protesting. And so, yes, it is kind of messed up, like, as an abolitionist. I'm not saying me myself, but there are abolitionists who do believe that, like, killer cops should go to jail and, like, they need to serve their time and et cetera. However, on the other hand, I think it does look, it's skewed when they're not held accountable within the system that we currently have. So when you're being convicted of a lesser degree, or maybe involuntary manslaughter, right? I think that lets down the community, right? So not all of us in the Black community, Latinx community are abolitionists. And I think it's important to recognize that there is still a community of people who want that person to be held accountable in the way that things are supposed to work for them, or what the state tells them is how it's supposed to work, and it's still not working. So what what hope do you have of justice occurring when you're being let down by the state at every turn, whether you're being killed and they're not being held accountable. I think that's really hard to it's something hard to grapple with. And should he go to jail for longer? Yeah, I think so. But I also don't believe in holding folks in prisons, right? But so that's something that I personally struggle with as well.
Okay, so I'm hearing a little bit of nuance that because over here I hear people saying exactly, yeah, we should keep going. So you're saying you can be abolitionist in terms of this is your view of what you want, but at the same time, if there's a family who's nah, that cop needs to go to jail, then you can within your work, or maybe not you in particular, or different people. I'm going to support this family. This family wants this person to jail. We want this person to go to jail. And also in the future, when we have control over this society, we actually don't think that prisons are the solution. We think that there's better ways to deal with things. But in this moment, we're going to support the call. That's what I'm wondering about. We're going to support the demand that the family is making, even though it doesn't exactly align with our views.
Because it's ultimately not about us.
Okay.
Right? If that's what the family wants, right?
Yeah.
And that's what they want. We're going to fight on behalf of them and the ones who are still living with us in community with us, because we're fighting out here for you.
Yeah. Okay. I like that.
And I just wanted to add that being an abolitionist, it's always a hard word. It's a privilege, right? I feel by nature I'm an abolisher. Abolitionist. But we're forced to be reformists, and we have to, right? Because we can't burn these fucking walls down right now, so we got to get our people out, right? So at the same time, it's this privilege, and I got a fucking perfect ass jail where these killer cops can go to. I mean, I don't want nobody to go to these jails that we have, because that's the problem, right? These jails are literally inhumane, literally torturing and violating human rights. The fact that people are defecating in their own seats and their own cells, this is really bad too. Nah, because I don't have that kind of hate in my body and none of this. You feel me? But yeah, he does need to get isolated. There's a prison somewhere, I don't know where, somewhere in one of these European places. That's a great prison. It's you go and it's a school, and you decide to go there because you really want to reform yourself. That's the kind of type of isolation I'm talking about, and we can send their asses over there, you know? But again, right, it's a privilege to say we don't want no prisons, but we can't do that right now. So we also need to make sure that this dude does go just like everybody else is going, right? But again, if I had the choice, we could send him to that one country somewhere where they have a great prison. But that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Okay. So the other question I wanted to ask Ash, and other people can chime in, of course, too.
Can you make this one easier?
Yeah.
Now with Karina.
It's a good question, right? Are we all thinking about it?
Yeah.
It's our goals, but then at the same time, it's well, come on, you know. And then especially when I think about well, we really do want to take power at some point, and I think about the revolutions that have happened, in Cuba and China, worldwide, and I think how is it that these countries have been able to hold on to their revolution, or how do you defend, when you win, how do you defend it against the same police who have been, stomping and humiliating our people for so long? I would think, and I really liked what you said, Ngozi, because it's not just what I think as a person, but in Cuba they had the people's tribunals, and they would go to the communities and say, well, what do you think about this cop? Should this cop go to jail, or what should happen? And I think that it's not just on me as a person to say what I think necessarily, but I think that the justice would be, let's figure this out, because they are killing us, right? And if we were to take over and take control and instill something else, and we're in the streets and we actually have power, well, if we don't put them, we got to put the cops somewhere. And if we don't put them somewhere, then they're going to come back and kill us. And so they're going to just be shooting back at us. So I'm sorry, I'm putting all that out there. But I feel it's an important question. People are really facing it right now. And I really appreciate your responses and the work that you've been doing actually on the ground to advance this bigger vision of what we want, and at the same time respecting the people who are facing it and taking their lead, right? Like you were saying, taking their lead too. So then the easier question I want to ask is a very good question. It's about the bail funds. Oh, I know that you're part of the Brooklyn bail. Yay! I know that you're part of the Brooklyn bail funds, and I think that that is such a powerful way of using the things that people are already doing for each other to help each other, but just organizing it and centralizing it more. So like, you know, we all know that bail is basically just like an anti-poor thing, right? It's like if you're poor and you are charged for something, you're going to go to jail unless you can pay this fine. And if you have money, then you know, pay your little thing and then you go back to business as usual. And if you don't have money, then your ass is staying there until you can get it. And then while we know that, you know, disproportionately young black men are being put in prisons, the role still, and women are of course too, right? And gender nonconforming people are too. But then you see also like all of these women, what are they doing when this happens? They're organizing in their families, collecting money, putting together the whatever savings they have to get this person this bail. And a lot of times women are acting as the fundraiser, the organizer, they are the legal advocate, and they're using, you know, working with each other in community to try to get this person out. And so I want you to talk about that great work with the Brooklyn Community Bail Fund and how, you know, that is proposing an alternative solution using tactics, cooperative tactics that already exist in our communities and amplifying those to, you know, to help our people right now.
So I try to keep it short because I could get real long and real nerdy about bail and bond. But yeah, so like paying bail for folks dates back to however far we want to go back. If we're talking about the U.S. in particular, and people have been doing this all over. So folks lean to like civil rights era during like protests and people bailing folks out. During here in New York, you know, the beginning of like Stonewall and folks like Marsha P. and Sylvia Rivera like figuring out how to get money to bail folks out here too. So this is like and we can go back further than that, right? Long histories. So yeah, I guess I'll say that like, so there are many bail and bond and also immigration bond funds across the country. And a lot of them have different sort of like political leanings, different like orientations to their work. So I was in Chicago, a part of the crew of like 12 of us who started the bond fund there. And then since I moved here, I work with Brooklyn, right? And there's many differences. Some of them have like very direct connections to like movement work. So that means when people are like doing actions against police, again, you know, BYP 100 in Chicago in particular, right? Like there were moves to bail out those folks, raise money, and then use that money to bail out other folks in community who aren't necessarily engaged in like protest activism. So that's a direct connection to both organizing work and also just, you know, folks living everyday lives who are arrested and incarcerated as well. And then there's also like larger scale in Brooklyn, we can pay bail for like a lot of people because I won't get too nerdy, but there's a statute here in New York, so we can only pay for like misdemeanor bail that's $2,000 cash or less, but that means we can get out a lot of folks. Also having more connections to movement work, but that being a newer thing. Again, immigration bond funds, many of them are in like Arizona, Texas, there's one in Massachusetts now, all over, right? And that's a different system. Those bail and bonds are higher. In New York, generally, they're the lowest are like $10,000. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of fundraising. But yeah, that connects to a lot of things. I think what I'm thinking of right now in this context is a panel in Chicago where folks from like abortion fund networks, folks from immigration bond networks, and also just other of us that do like bail and bond more generally, just having conversations about synergy between like reproductive justice work, bail and bond fund work, and just gender-based violence work in particular. Because if we are bailing out specifically women, and also, again, queer, trans, and GNC people, right? Like, many of those folks, I think the numbers, as far as, like, jail and prisons go, can flow anywhere between, like, 70 and 90% of folks have experiences with, like, gender-based violence and crimes. So we are bailing out people who have direct relationships to, like, violence because of gender and sexuality. So that synergy should be, I think, more robust, and it's super important, right? And that was just something recently, like I've been thinking of in particular, but also in the work that we're doing, well, again, around the mass commutation stuff and some other stuff is like we are helping raise legal fees for people, and that includes paying people's bail, and those bails can be as low as they can possibly be, but they can also be $50,000 bails, right? And we can do that because of you all and like other people that aren't in this room that like fundraise. So it's always a part of the work that I've been doing. And I think the other point I wanted to make, I might have lost it. It's gone. But yeah.
We'll come back.
Yes.
Can you jump in?
Yeah, so I was just going to say we've done a lot of work around national bailout, mass bailouts, Black Mama bailout, where on Mother's Day we just bail out a whole bunch of Black mothers because we know that a lot of Black moms are the heads of the households, and right when you lock up Black women, right, like you're taking away a lot of security for their families as well. And so that's definitely something that disproportionately affects, like if we want to talk about like state violence and gender, right? Like Black women and femmes, like that's a really big deal. So what does it look like to be able to bail Black women and femmes out, to be back with their families? And on top of that, 70-80% of folks on Rikers are held in pretrial detention. Right, so when you think about that, and like you're actually criminalizing poverty, like, and that's really fucked up. That's really fucked up. And obviously most of these people are Black and brown, right? So what does it mean when you have these people that really just need money? And so some of the work that we do is raising funds for them so that they can get up out of there because they need to provide for their families. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ngozi. Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate the bailout movement. Money kept them in, love brought them out, right? Yeah, I mean, our Latinx, immigrant folks, criminalized folks, we're all under that umbrella of the bailout, right? What's really important and what's really special about the movement right now, especially Free Black Mamas in DC. I was living in DC, so in the DMV area. Not only are they bailing folks out, but they're also providing a whole fellowship it's a political an opportunity to politically educate folks, right, and bring them in, right? So a lot of the women I've been blessed to work and do stage readings to fundraise to bail more people out through storytelling, right? And like a lot of these women that got bailed out are like next to me doing these stage readings, and we're like, and we're working together now. We've been a part of like so many conferences for incarcerated people and women and girls, and these homies are there now, and we're organizing. We're figuring out what we want to do. So it's super important. Because like everybody who comes out and sees, right? I mean, women who've been locked up for 30 years, right? All of this shit, they come out into this like support circle, right? Of this community. Because also like community organizing is such an access and also another opportunity, like a privilege, right? Like I didn't know nothing about community organizing till I got locked up. So like when they come to us and provide us with this opportunity, right? A lot of the women like need this support system, right? So they gravitate really quickly towards like community organizing because again, we do it out of love. So I'm just like super in awe of the things that BYP and a lot of our partner organizations are doing. In Arizona, in Eloy specifically, the judges there are not letting women get bailed out. Basically, like even when they do get bonded, which is really hard to even get a bond. But even when they do, like they want a sponsor also. So it's not only that money, it has to be there, right? It also has to be like this U.S. citizen person who has to like come forward and sponsor you. I mean, I've seen organizations sponsor folks, and then like the judge is like, well, I don't know who that org is, so nope, bail denied or whatever, right? So like, it's just like this other, piece to that bonding folks out in immigration prisons.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to build off of the synergy that Ash mentioned about, which is not something you see all the time, but I think is really, really important. So I wanted to ask Ale about it, and other people can contribute to it as well. So thinking about the synergy between the reproductive justice movement and then this movement against mass incarceration. So there's a bill in Ohio that would prosecute criminally women and doctors who get or perform an abortion, women or people who can become pregnant, who get or perform an abortion. So this means they would be basically putting women and people who can become pregnant in jail for ending a pregnancy or possibly having a miscarriage. And this is really the culmination of this crusade by the far right, which we know is fascist. So these far right fascists that have taken it upon themselves to, really center this fetal personhood over all other things. And so, here we see an example of this gender and state violence just as one, right? Combined as one. So I'm wondering, Ale, if you could speak a little bit about, so if these, rising fascist right-wing movement, they've really united their movements by focusing on reproductive rights. So how can we as anti-fascists, how can we organize around this issue to defend these hard-fought rights and connect with all the other struggles that we're facing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's doing the same thing as is like uniting ourselves to support reproductive rights, basically. I think abortion, right, is like you think of reproductive rights, you think about reproductive health, you think about abortion. They've been able to really mobilize around pro-life and around this. Again, this power that mujeres have, right, to create or not create. That shit is scary to them, right? So of course they're going to focus there. But again, our people and to be able to also see the power in being able to create and not create and support reproductive rights, support a decision of a woman to like say no or yes. But also when we're talking about like criminalizing, again, fighting around criminalization, fighting against control and surveillance of the state, right, is like a place that we all have to meet up again. And a place where we got to talk about, I feel like, again, going back to our indigenous ways of like being in community. Right, so I think a lot of like the work that we did together, for example, Corinna, you and I at the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health, it was all about having conversations, really, like what's personal is political. We've all heard about it. It's so real, y'all. And that's where I kind of start off when I want to talk to our communities and stuff like that, because, again, abortion, reproductive health care is taboo in a lot of senses, right? So it's about like dismantling, right, and busting all of those myths to really like get to have relations with one another and really see each other like this could have been you, this could have been us, my family members. So I think supporting and advocating people who do reproductive rights work, right, storytellers like myself with the National Network of Abortion Funds, Fund Abortions, Build Power, who's heard that before, is real. Say it again. I want to say it again. Fund Abortions, Build Power. Right, that's a big statement, like for you to stand next to women who are choosing to decide, over their own bodies. Like that's how we need to be united, is by like just definitely, again, centering people, trans, GNC folks that have had to make these decisions, because again, they see abortion as a way to control us, right? Either they're forcing us, sterilizing us to not have any babies, or they're forcing us to have these babies. We would talk about sex work, right? Like the government was making like that kind of work criminalized and illegal, and you can go to jail for it, but then they're not providing the tools for us to actually work in other places or whatever, right? So it's like we didn't create poverty, right? Society didn't do that. So again, it's like supporting this movement, particularly reproductive rights movement, reproductive health. Gender is a construct of fascism in a sense, right? Again, so focusing on a lot of that interrelational like type of conversations right now. Like that's the only way that for me personally I'm bringing my family with me, is having these one-on-one conversations and being like, without me telling them, most of them that I've had an abortion, I'm like, that experience of having an abortion is my experience, and just like taking it day by day. Definitely, you don't have to share everything all the time, right? My mom don't need to know that I had 4 abortions. She's cool with just 1. It's better for her.
Something I also just wanted to mention was the connection of anti-Black violence in reproductive conversations in the reproductive system. So not only is there like the exclusion of TG&C folks that definitely need reproductive health care and rights, right? Like it's not just women who have periods, there are people who have periods also. And doctors, medical professionals not being well equipped to care for certain people. In addition to that, so some of the work that we've done over the past couple of years is get the Sims statue removed in East Harlem. So J. Marion Sims was a gynecologist who experimented on Black slave women without anesthesia. And he's known as the father of modern gynecology. So his statue has been removed after a lot of work that we've been doing. And so now we are sort of working with the city to replace the statue and kind of reimagine like what this space that like represented this harm of this institution, but also this white man, right, who did so much harm on Betsy, Anarcha, Lucy, and tons of other unnamed Black women. What does this look like? What does healing look like? What does it mean to have equity in healthcare, right? What does it mean that as this person, as the father of modern gynecology, currently what we have right now, Black women are still dying. Like, we have the highest maternal mortality rates in this country, and like, that's crazy. It doesn't matter what socioeconomic status you come from, right? Like, what your education is, like, none of that shit matters. So so the anti-Blackness in reproductive, like, healthcare and rights in general, like, is really skewed. And so how do we fix that? Do we have to have a system? Like, what is it? Because that's also a state, right? Like, that's state violence too. So how do we fight that as well? How do we care for ourselves, right? Like, I know a lot of people who are in doula training, right? So how do we get that out there? How do we encourage our folks in our community to, like, say, hey, try to go to a doula, or, right? Because I don't know if you're gonna come out alive. Like, that's a scary thing to say when somebody that you know is going to the hospital to give birth.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Please.
I was just gonna add to your point about equity in healthcare, just like universal healthcare. So my understandings, especially about like reproductive justice, not just like choosing to be a pregnant person or choosing not, but also choosing to be able to like get yourself checked out if you want that, and for that to be free for people, all people, especially we're centering women in this conversation, but just adding that into to my learnings and understandings that like that should also always be included, and not just like pregnancy, but also just like care generally.
That's so radical of you. Wow.
So with that, I want to open it up to everybody in the room. If you want to add to this conversation, if you want to pose a question to let's give a big round of applause to our panelists, please. And if you want to direct a question in particular to our particular person, just, raise your hand and I can take a stack. But not everybody at once. One at a time. Yes. Okay, and then I'll come. Oh.
What I was thinking about when we were talking about not call the police or when you might need to call the police. In movement circles, sometimes a woman is molested or assaulted by usually a man. And I was at an event at Judson Memorial Church, and Sylvia Federici, who might be known to many people here, was saying, if this has happened to anyone here, let us know, because if the perp was a member of an organization or part of a movement, we can organize and speak to this man privately so he doesn't do this again. Because he said otherwise women quit organizations and take the left and then they've been assaulted and molested. So, within our own circles, there's sometimes a need for us not to use the police, but to do something.
Yeah.
That's all.
Definitely. Good point. Thank you.
And thank you, Sylvia. Live here.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Well, the first thing you're talking about, you were talking about incarceration, and especially that Eloy is private CCA in particular. So for a lot of people, given that CCA is, they want people to keep being detained, and that's how they profit. If they have less than 97% of the people in or of their jails filled, most times they will shut down because it's not profitable anymore. So, in your opinion, like, or for all of y'all, but mentioning you because you mentioned CCA. So, what steps can be taken to actually like combat CCA in particular, given that they are some of the more inhumane prisons, and that they want to keep honestly putting you back in jail because you give them money?
Yeah. CCA is Correctional Corporations of America, which now they turned their name into like Core Civic, because they want to do more than prison work. They want to expand to your homes, to your post-jail needs, whatever. So in Eloy particularly, it's the #1 employer in our community there. I remember Claudia, who just recently got deported to Mexico. She was a year in our regular Perryville women's prison for defending herself also, and she lived like 5 minutes from the detention center. So I think, for particularly in CCA, in our community, sometimes like our own county or our own like city actually like gives ICE the contracts, which work with CCA. So we have a lot that we can do there. For me personally, Eloy is really scary. The geography there is really hard to organize. It's really far away from our communities. From anywhere, it's like an hour and a half, whether it's from Phoenix or from Tucson and all that. But I think it's a really good opportunity to do, to talk to the community in Eloy, right? Like a lot of people that live in Eloy are employed by the detention center, right? So it's a lot of community education that has to happen around that. But we can hold local elected officials like accountable. A lot of communities, I forget who recently just shut down one of the detention centers or stopped another one from building, right? So there's a lot that we can do. I'm definitely really excited that I moved back to Arizona, not only to like work on a governor's pardon. So regardless of what happens to me in court for this political asylum, we're still going to ask for a governor's pardon. Doug Ducey, who's the governor in Arizona, has only given away one pardon, y'all, for like this older man to get his gun rights back. Ooh. So that kind of work. But I think again, it's who has the power, right? Who has the power to let CCA come in and have this free go at this detention center, right? Nobody is like being transparent. There hasn't been a stakeholder like a tour, which is like, yeah, like community members can come in and check out what they're doing, how they're doing. There hasn't been one in like so long. And even when they're there, we as the women in there, we don't get to see them. They get to choose who they talk to, right? I've never been a part of an audit because, you know, I would say stuff that they wouldn't want us to hear, right? They pick and choose who's going to talk to these people that are auditing and who can talk to the community stakeholders. But again, I think there's a lot of efforts in community power. Like, we're the ones. It's nobody ever just gave us our rights. Like, we, the people, demanded them and expanded on them, right? And like, nothing has been like glorious given to us. So I think right now it's just local communities against those specific private institutions, right? Because a lot of people are making money, and they're the ones that are lobbying really hard right now to give more money to build more detention centers, right? I don't know if y'all are watching Orange is the New Black. It's kind of cool now because they brought in some like community organizing aspects to it. But this season coming up is literally like detention centers, immigration prisons. Like, they've cleared out all of their facilities and even release folks, but like are emptying it out for immigrants, right? So again, criminalizing people that are coming, you know, to create better lives, for security, for all of this, because U.S. imperialism has done this to their countries, right? They're coming here. Right now, the people that are like filling up the detention centers are here just for being here, for reunifying with their families, just by existing here. They're criminalizing with felonies, y'all. People can get up to 20 years right now if they came in already twice to the border. Right, so it's really tough, but we can do a lot of community defense within our communities, again, follow that trail. Who's hiring, who's giving this money, right? We can pressure our communities to like not do what they've been doing.
Yeah, thinking about abolition, I think that question is really important that you asked. I think that it's super messy, right? Like, the space between abolition as a theory and then how we practice it, and also how we move to like a space of transition, right? There's like a lot of space, a lot of contradiction in that space. And I'm just thinking also particularly about here in New York a few years ago when Akai Gurley was murdered. There was actually a lot of conflict amongst organizations that have been working together for a long time, but had really different stances on abolition. So some folks were really like, okay, we will go with the family to the court. Like, we will stand with them in asking for Peter Liang to be imprisoned, right? There were folks that were super down for that. And then there were also organizations that were like, we will send like self-care packages to the family because we support their well-being, but like we won't stand in like the ask that they're making. And it was really a very like divisive thing, and some of those relationships still have not had space to be like worked through, and that's had a huge impact actually like on our ability to like organize together. And I think, you know, something that I've also noticed about conversations around abolition and also transformative justice is that there's some of the most judgmental spaces that we have in our movements. There's just a lot of like who's more left than who, like who is more radical. And the thing is, like, we're all really indoctrinated with carceral thinking. Like, we're from like childhood, like we learn about punishment in a really specific way. So we all have stuff to unpack, but I feel like what I'm really hungry for is like for there to be space for us to do that like unraveling, that unworking together. And then also that piece of imagining, right? Like imagining actually what these transitions look like, rather than actually like disposing of each other in the process of talking about how like we shouldn't dispose of people in prisons, right? Like there's like something really bizarre about being like, I literally am like not gonna sit down at a table with people who don't have the same abolitionist vision that I have. Like we're just like, we're not gonna get anywhere.
Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Asantor Nkrumah Toure. I live and organize in Philadelphia. I want to ask the panel another controversial question to make your life really easy, right? There's a lot of community bail funds popping up across the country, and they're grassroots led, they're grassroots organized, and I think that's a really good thing. But what's also coming up is, in some cities, there are questions about, well, who decides who we raise bail money for if the person is an abuser? Now, the thing about transformative justice and everything like that that's been discussed this morning, I previously worked in the domestic violence field, and in my professional and community experience, those who cried the loudest for transformative justice were habitual abusers. I know that for a fact. I can name names.
Name them.
In DC. But so how do we politically and ethically figure this one out? Because sometimes we may be against jails and prisons and whatever, but the person who's seeking bail from a community bail fund is an abuser, and the person that they abuse may want them to stay in jail to give them time to get to safety, because their community is not prepared materially or politically yet to provide that safety. What do we do?
So I just met this beautiful woman on Tinder after deleting Tinder because I was like, I'm through with Tinder, trash men everywhere. But I was like, I'm gonna give women a chance. So I'm in Arizona and I opened up Tinder and I got this phone number, you know, we're like talking and getting to know each other, and she's like, yeah, I have 3 kids, and I'm like, okay, what's up with your baby's daddies, you know, and like one of them is in prison, he's been in prison for 7 years, you know, and I'm just like, oh, I'm sorry, we need our loved ones back, you know. And she's like, nope, he can stay in fucking jail, he abused me, blah, 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 all of these things, right? And I'm like, ooh, okay. So I was like, hey, just so you know, at some point, I don't remember if I did it directly, but I was just like, hey, I mean, she already knew that I was like a community advocate, educator, whatever the fuck. And I was like, hey, just so you know, I work against prisons, against this, you know, this type of state violence, but by no means do I want anybody to hurt you again. And I just started it there, you know, and I'm just like, I just want you to know, right? Because we're going to keep having these conversations around why it does. I mean, this abuser is not going to learn anything or change because he's in jail for 20, 30, 40 plus years either, right, at the same time. So I'm just like imagining, like, we're going to have these conversations again because I'm trying to get to know her. And yeah, I felt like that was the most, like, to meet her where she was at, you know, and just, but also being like true to who I am and the conversations we're going to have, you know. And I think I don't have the answer to that. I was just really like, literally just happened maybe like 3 days ago where I was just like, you know, I work to abolish prisons and I don't believe in this, but I also do not want anybody to hurt you, and I think we can have those conversations more, right? So that was really great, and she didn't push me back, right? Because a lot of people also think like, yo, like you want these people out here, right? These abusers or violent people, then you're not a friend of mine either. Then you're not here for my safety. So that's really like tough, and it happens all the time. But again, right, it's like, it's the access to the information I've had as being somebody impacted in like the work that I do. Not everybody knows what happens in prisons, literally, even to abusers that I don't even think us, like I said, we don't have anything evil and malicious in us. We don't even want, I don't even think that she would want this abuser to be treated like people are treated in some of these prisons, right? So I don't know, that's a start. Maybe we can talk a little more.
Okay. I think a lot of things that we have conversations about is what does transformative justice look like when there is a risk of folks being harmed from the same community. And I think it would be important to have programs for abusers, right, to transformative justice programs. But seeing as how that's not really a thing set up in our communities right now, are we supposed to prioritize them in getting out of jail? I mean, I personally don't know who they are, what their story is, what their past is, what they've learned from being locked up for however long. Should we what? Should we what?
Should we ask them? Should that be a part
of
the conversation?
Who are we? Yeah, I personally don't know. I don't know. I think it's important for. I still think it's important for all of us to be free, right? Like, I'm not free until everybody else is free. I think it is important yet to bail out anyone that we can. I don't think anybody deserves to be locked up. But I think another question to add on top of that is, how do we keep those domestic violence survivors safe? If we are bailing this person out and they've perpetuated harm onto this other person, what does it look like to keep this person safe, knowing that like this is what we believe in and we don't believe in locking this person up? However, like, how do we keep this person safe while we're all in community together?
I mean, I was just gonna say, like, and as people are bringing folks out, right, like with this, like, for example, just speaking of DC folks with Janae from BYP, like this fellowship for theater, right? Like, what does it look like to bring people out and do this whole other fellowship on transformative justice, and like, you know, or like what are the things like that as a community we can support people who like then actually do come out? I know for Janae, even her, like, she's like, I don't give a fuck what they did. I'm getting them out, and then we're gonna figure that out. But I know that she's actually done that, right? Like a lot of people maybe are just bailing folks out, and there's this other piece of like what happens when they come out, right? Because they still got to go to court, whether you're an abuser or not. You still got to go to court. You still got to figure out how to sustain yourself before you get locked up again because you're stealing food, right? Like there's just so many things. Not just abusers need all of this support, but it's like, how do we meet how do we meet all together and be like, okay, how are we going to be receiving these folks back? Because at the end of the day, we're doing this because we don't have the privilege to just abolish prisons right now. We're trying to reform it in a way of keeping people out. Again, nobody's being safe in there, not even the abuser. And I guess it goes back to what does justice look like? Yeah.
I have a bunch of thoughts. I've thought about this a lot. I've been in conversation with people who are a part of bail and bond funds a lot, and we've talked about this. So I'm not going to fully expand on them, but of course I'm down to talk more. So I guess one of my thoughts currently, when we think about people who cause harm, who are incarcerated, who need bail, those people are the very people that we often say we want to like advocate for. Those are very much so people of color too. So these are not, we're not talking about white men, we're not talking about Harvey Weinstein, right? Like we're not talking about, I'm talking specifically like affluent white men. We're talking about largely poor folks of color. So to me, in the work that like I'm engaged in, that includes people who have caused harm and folks who haven't. Because to me, that means though that those folks don't deserve more to be in or to be punished any more than anyone else who causes harm, right? To me, I think the point at which I love and like again have thought about a lot, the safety planning conversation, that is a question for individual bail and bond funds, right? Like what role do we want to play once someone is bailed out and we know possibly, right? We always don't know. Like there are many nuances in the conversations we're talking about too. We also are assuming that we know everything that's going on. to build off of that, right? Like even people who are harmed sometimes will say, I want the person out, or like this was just like one little thing, it's fine, or like this person is like my kid's parent or whoever. I just wanted them to leave me alone for an hour. I didn't want them to be wrapped up in this entire system. So I think sometimes we make full sort of like homogenous sort of like declarative statements about people who experience harm, and like that's also not true. Many of them who I've talked to also don't want the person, like I'm saying, who they experience harm by to be in either. And I think that's important. Like stuff like orders of protection don't work. Many times people don't want them. They, not only are they supposed to be against the person who caused harm, they also then engulf the person who possibly experienced that harm in their entire life, and now your entire life is surveilled and your movement is surveilled. You might lose your housing, et cetera, because of that. So how helpful was that system that now you have to engage in? So anyway, part of that. But the safety planning conversation, right, like I was saying, bail and bond funds like are really trying to think about that. And I think some of them are doing it very explicitly, and others, like, there's a lot of work to do. So if someone does disclose, right, like that they are experiencing some like current harm, like are there places that we can turn folks to be like, here's some support structure? What support structures do you already have in your life that we can like just help enhance, right? Like, so instead of going back to your house, is there somewhere else you can go? Is there a family member's house you can go, right, to? And obviously understanding the multiple layers of like harm, like they're not just physical, also like emotional, like financial, coercion, et cetera, et cetera. So like I think your question, I think is like many of the questions are like not a simple one. I think also some of the answers that have been posed, largely from what I've seen, have been posed by mainstream sort of like DV orgs to say like, don't bail these people out because survivors want this. But when you talk to actual survivors, like I'm saying, it's a lot more nuanced. So I question that as a response to say like, don't do a thing. And oftentimes that comes from, to be very frank, comes from a lot of like white women in DV orgs. It just does. And not to say that like women of color like all think the same way either, but there is a lot more nuance there from my experience. I think the last thing I'll say is, yeah, there's space, and I think to what you said in the back a minute ago, and I think you wanted to respond to, a lot more space to be built for like community accountability work, self-accountability work, and all of that, and in the bail and bond fund spaces too, that I think folks like Miriam and other folks, a part of like other collaboratives and such have been working on. We've been working closely and related to. But I would agree though with you and Gozi that like for me, my politic is that like I don't want anyone in, and how can we chip away at the structures that currently exist? And what we're seeing now is that, especially here in New York, just to bring it local, like a lot of sort of like smaller misdemeanor cases are and have been over the course of a few years now been decriminalized. And so the ones that are the harder ones now are the ones where there's incidents, particularly of people who have alleged to have been harmed. So whether that has happened or not. So then we're trying to like not talk about that. But at some point, we're going to really have to talk about it if we are trying to get to this abolitionist possibility. Because that's what's happening, is that like now they're saying, okay, we're fine with like weed, theoretically, right? There's still people being arrested. We're fine with that. We're fine with property. We're fine with like people shouldn't be in for turnstile. But there's a person now, so like they got to stay in. And that then gets us to this higher, further thresholds, right? Like we got to then think about like felony. Like what do people think about that? So I think to get to the abolitionist sort of reality, we have to actually think about it and we have to confront it. Otherwise, like we're just going to have a lot of people out for like, lower level sort of charges, and then we're just going to say, well, fuck it to everybody else that's in. And that's not what I want to see, personally. But I think your question's a good one.
All right. So we have a couple more here. And then is there a last one? I think we want to wrap up after. Okay, please do the last two. All right, cool.
Just say I deeply, deeply appreciate your response and the entire conversation. I think it's incredibly timely given that there is indeed a bifurcation even in both reformist, the whole spectrum to abolitionist spaces around like how do we feel in instances where people have been harmed. And I don't think, to your point, Ash, we need to put ourselves in that space, and we haven't fully put ourselves in that space. And so I'm really curious about some of what's come out of the workshops that BYP 100 has done in different buildings and with different folks, because I'm also a believer, in some of my experience has been that a lot of the spaces where folks are engaging in radical imagination are not necessarily diverse, in that like,
there are folks who are of a certain class or who've been in organizing for a while, and it doesn't necessarily include folks who have survived or who've engaged in harm or who live on the, at different kind of like levels of relation to whatever is taking place. I'm really curious about that, because I've also just been thinking a lot, in some of the work I've been doing at my workplace and getting folks to think about how do we operationalize transformative justice. One of the kind of scenarios we've put ourselves in is like the case of that young boy Junior who was murdered in the Bronx.
Yeah.
And thinking about there are like 6 lives, or multiple now because of that instance. NYPD then uses those instances of harm to say we're going to sweep anyone who is connected to those young people.
Yeah.
So really thinking through again, I'm just curious if there's anything coming out of those workshops that would help, kind of strengthen our efforts to operationalize a new system of accountability.
Maybe can we take one more question in case there's some things combined?
Sure.
You can speak to both of
Sure.
them? Yeah. Thank you.
Hi there. I guess my question is about what is an alternative way to seek truth without the police, because I'm from Brazil and we still don't know who killed Marielle. And we've been waiting, we've been searching. Like, we all know the state is involved, the police is involved. Some last news that we just got like 2 days ago really indicate that the police is involved, the state is involved. They don't want to say who's involved. And we've been pushing and we've been creating visibility, and I'm so happy to see her in the poster of this event and see her picture here, and that you guys are talking about this. It really means a lot to us. And what is an alternative way to seek truth if you're not doing it through the state and through the police? Because I feel like we don't have the apparatus, even technology-wise, to find out who shot her when she was coming out of a speech, of like a conference, and her driver, Anderson, who was with her. And I don't even know what to say to Monica, her wife, and to her daughter, or I don't even know them personally, but if I were to meet them personally, I wouldn't know what to say, because I couldn't suggest another way to find truth if not through the police, who actually probably murdered her. So it's like a mind fuck, especially because she spent her entire life fighting against police brutality in the favelas. So it's just really a crazy cycle what happened with her, and yeah.
Did we want to take that?
Okay. Do you want to, take one more? Is that?
Can we
No,
respond to these two, but still take this one?
Yes.
Okay. So just to respond to the first question, there was a lot in there. Some of the work we have been doing in conjunction with the murder of Junior, there was also another girl that was murdered. I don't remember her name right now. Maybe like a couple days before or after, but within the same week. So we do a lot of work with our Stop the Raids Coalition, which is based off of the Bronx 120 gang raids that happened a few years ago now. And the hyper-surveillance of black and brown folks, especially in like the Bronx and Brooklyn. Some of the work that we've been doing with residents and impacted families, right, and helping provide support, prepare for when their loved ones get out, but also what they need while their loved ones are in there. And kind of like talking with residents and folks about what NYPD specifically is doing, the harm that they're instituting on our communities, but also the alternatives, and like holding them accountable, but also holding us accountable, when clearly like a form of state violence is when the state is put in place, supposed to protect you, but isn't protecting you. Like, what does that mean for us? So some of the outcomes for like talking with residents in NYCHA have been, do you feel safe? Does like this hyper surveillance really make you feel safe? What would you like to see instead? Are some of the conversations we've been having. I don't really know how else to answer the rest of your question. I apologize for that. But those are some things we've really been talking through with residents, because this hyper surveillance also with swipe it forwards, right? Like, there's a criminalization of poverty over $2.75. And now fare beating is the number 5 cause of arrest in New York City, but overwhelmingly 90% of those arrests are still black and brown folks. So we have town halls with residents and like of the community and saying like, hey, do y'all notice like this is happening? And like this is actually a direct effect of gentrification in your communities. We did a swipe forward at the Nostrand Avenue station a couple weeks ago, and I've never seen so many white people in this part of Brooklyn where like my family is from, like West Indians, right? Like this is historically a West Indian neighborhood where now I've never seen so many white people, and like I live in Jersey City now, like I can't afford to like live near my family in Brooklyn. Like that's wild. But what does it look like to stop the criminalization of poverty and have cops come up to you and tell you like you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to be here, and saying actually no, I know my rights, I'm helping out my people, and there's nothing that you can do to tell me that I can't do that? You're not protecting and serving this community. I'm doing a better job at this than you are. Sorry. That's my response.
Anyone want to take the question about Marielle?
Oh, I'm sorry. Can I, is it? Yeah, hi. Thanks so much for this panel. I feel like saddened and inspired simultaneously. It's a strange kind of set of emotions. So I'm really interested in the dialogue about systems and that really policing and its relationship to the white supremacist narrative. You know, when we had slavery and then we had Jim Crow and then we have the school to prison pipeline. I'm thinking about the promise in a white supremacist narrative. You know, if you are supreme, that at the end of, if you do believe in that narrative, that at the end of the 18 months training as a police officer, you get to actively enact and have life force over black and brown bodies. And so I'm really curious, given the transformation of kind of a white supremacist patriarchal model, as we look at transformative justice, are we seeing ways that policing is changing into the next form of whatever that is to keep white supremacist narrative and promise alive? And also when we reimagine transformative justice, what does that look like in a space where white supremacy can be capitalized and offered as a career? Along with that, I'm really interested in this dynamic of, does that make sense? Okay, I'm also really interested in also us and abolition of our dollars, in that CAA has board members, Microsoft gives the police facial recognition. You know, CAA has board members that serve on other businesses, and how we can actually stop funnels of funding of our own oppression and looking at models that really hold them as businesses and corporations that capitalize and create huge amounts of money on our imprisonment in a white supremacist system, to actively use that to liberate in some capacity. Thanks.
Cool, thanks for that question. I'm going to answer your question. Not that I have a great answer, but alternative ways to seek truth. So I think a lot of that also we should talk about, or when I think about that, is just like, what does forgiveness also look like, right? Whether we actually intentionally have to forgive and forget. You know, forgiving doesn't mean you have to have relationships with these people, right? Or whatever, like, but what does the forgiveness look like? I know that, you know, in Mexico, for example, the parents of the 43, even like when they're organizing for justice right now, they're, you know, el gobierno, the government is just basically like trying to look for the disappeared, but it's like the parents are just like, how do we look for them as if they're still alive? So for them, that's hella healing right there, right? I don't know if they're gonna find justice, right? Because again, the same people that made the 43 disappear is la policía, right? The state violence. But I see that as a form of them seeking their own truth, right? It's just like, and also how we want to frame this, right? Because like, yeah, they were just like, okay, we're gonna find the disappeared, but it's like, no, we have to look for them as if they're still alive, right? So they're defining what that truth is gonna look like for them too. And again, right, like, what does get moving past that if you really can't? Because like, we have to heal, we have to also move forward, right? So just as a community, to have those conversations. I don't think I had the perfect answer, but yeah. And I don't know if you guys wanted to answer her question in the back.
I'll just say two. So one of my thoughts, I think, to your question or to your point about money, was I just thought about the Abolition app. So you can download this app and
what is it?
It's called Abolition. So it's an app that basically you use like pocket change, and like it goes to, so a black trans person in Cali, Courtney Ziegler came up with it. He does a lot of tech stuff. But your pocket change money goes to like bailing people out. So it collects a bunch of money, and then like he donates all the money. He's donated a lot of it to Mama's Bailout and like a bunch of the national bailouts. So it's just like a thing you can do. I think the other point, and maybe this is more for Ngozi to say, just sort of like many of like Movement for Black Lives, including BYP 100's platforms around invest, divest. I thought of when you said that. I don't know if you were going to speak to that point. And then I think the other point, I think maybe you said something about like, I interpreted, I'm sorry if this is incorrect, but sort of expansions of police or policing and like as career points. I guess maybe in my work at least, right, like just seeing ICE and police presence and corroboration in like courts when I'm going to bail people out, and like how that's been especially ramped up in this sort of like 45 era that we've been in. And obviously, right, like people have been unfortunately deported for years, though that has been a larger presence, I think, especially since his sort of like him being in office. So that's just something I've seen. Also, it made me think about the way that I think police in a certain era, I guess, in the past couple of years, like this sort of like niceness of police that's happening. So like when you see them with like pride fucking like cars and like what do you call them? SUVs. I'll say SVU. At like pride parades and shit like that, and like they're making themselves sort of like nice, like we love queer people too. Like come, be, like enjoy our company, and we'll take care of you. I mean, maybe this is also a function of just like my age, but like I feel like I'm seeing that a lot more too, and how like fucked up and difficult, and like how people are constantly, and we need to continue to do more to like push back on that niceness narrative, right? Like we're here for you, so include us in your like BLM rally, and like we're here for you, so like let's go grab a drink at like Pride or whatever. Those are just some of the things that like I think your points made me sort of think of, but yeah.
So I was going to mention the divest, invest. Yeah, there's so much money that goes to prisons, and right, like No Cop Academy in Chicago, right? Like, why are you putting $95 million into a cop academy when like you have the most police officers in the entire country, actually, and you're shutting down schools on no basis, right? Like, they're the highest number of like students in Chicago public schools are now Latinx, right? Like, this is Chicago. They're black kids are not like a majority population. So what does it look like to keep white supremacy out of transformative justice spaces? I think it's really important to, right, like center the most marginalized. What does it look like to ask a black trans woman, what does safety look like to you, right? Because that answer looks very, very different from asking a cis white woman what safety looks like to her. So I think it's important to have those conversations, and that's what we mean when we center folks, right? Like, whose stories do you not hear about every day? Who is the most directly impacted? Who needs to be the most protected? And why aren't they in the room? Why aren't we talking to them specifically? Because, police were originally slave catchers, right? So what does it mean when you still have black and brown folks on the NYPD, right? Still also defending their own districts or whatever for whichever cop killed Saheed Vassell back in April in Brooklyn. So, like, how do we keep white supremacy out of our transformative justice spaces? That's how I can think of one way of doing it. However, like, white supremacy is so deeply embedded even in our communities, especially from like folks that look like us but definitely like don't have our best interests at heart, right? And like are seen as traitors to the community as well, especially when like one of our own is killed in this community that you represent, that if you were to take that uniform off, you're just like the rest of us. But because they pay you well, supposedly, right? Like it's all cool with you. And that is a problem that we're working on. We're working on improving.
Thank you. All right, well, let's give a big round of applause to our panelists, please. They really tackled some very difficult questions, and they're doing the work, more and most importantly, on top of, thinking about these things and analyzing and, they're in the ground, right? They're like right there working with people every day, trying to figure out these solutions and talking with the people who are most impacted and really trying to build community and build across movements. And so I want to just appreciate you all for all the work that you're doing, and thank you for your participation, for your knowledge. I want to thank the audience, all the activists and organizers in the audience. We know right now we're on this little table, and another panel, you're on that little table. We're all here to learn from each other. That's the purpose of this. So thank you all. Hope you have a great lunch and enjoy the rest of the day.
I just wanted to add something, y'all. Sorry, Claudia. Y'all live in New York. Y'all got, Alexandria Ocasio. Is that her name? Cortez. So I am also a member of Mi Gente, which is a Latinx, Chicanx digital organizing hub for folks to connect and really elevate policy issues that matter to Afro-Latinas, Latinx people, indigenous people. And we have an immigration policy platform that talks about abolishing ICE, right? So a lot of people may not be sure what that looks like, what that means. So we actually have a policy platform on our website, mijente.net. That's really comprehensive, especially for all you organizers and people who are really interested in what's happening. But it talks about the systems, right? It talks about Border Patrol, what that system looks like, and then reimagining that. Even the Department of Justice, it's something new, right? That as people who want to abolish all the systems, right? Something we can actually do as reformists. But it's really, really great. Y'all should totally check it out and look it up. I'm reading through it right now, and it's like an abundance of wealth, and it's really comprehensive. And again, it's something that y'all can talk to Alexandria about, right? Because I don't think she really understands what abolish ICE really means, and like how comprehensive and tangible it really is. And it's like literally goes through it. I'm also again, I have a website with my deportation case active, so y'all can support and sign up and see how you guys can keep alefree.org. So yeah, shout outs and just support on that end. But thank you so much.
Can we do plugs too?
Now we all gotta do plugs. Let's go.
I just have 3 quick ones. So one was that app, the Abolition app, if you want to download that. We talked a lot about bail and bond stuff. The second is S&P is going to have a letter writing event here on December 9th. It's from like 1 to 4:30. So be on the lookout for that. And then the website for the mass comms stuff is freethemny.com. And there's postcards over there. If you could fill one out, send it in, and just we're trying to also like flood Cuomo's mail as we're continuing this campaign. So those things. Thank you.
Thanks, Ash. And I have mine too. So if y'all are interested in learning more about BYP 100, you can go on byp100.org. If you're interested in like donating to get our people free, because organizing is not paid most of the time. You can Venmo us at BYP-100 NYC. There are some little like handouts, one-pagers over there on the table. Thanks, y'all. Have a good day.
Whoa. Hold up. I got some plugs too. Okay. Wait a minute, buddy. Right. So in addition to Free Ale, Mi Gente, to Abolition, December 9th letter writing, Flood Cuomo, BYP 100, mass bailout, I would like to add Breaking the Chains magazine, beautiful magazine out there in the front that's talking about housing, that's talking about police brutality, that's talking about organizing, all the different issues that our communities are facing. And we have our space at the Justice Center in El Barrio, 116 in Park, so you can feel free to come and visit us. And cool, that's it. Thank you.
How we doing? Good? Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you for asking. So let's give another round of applause to this great panel. It was informational, inspiring, and also challenging us to do the work that we need to do. Let us remember that when we talk about exploitation and we talk about oppression, we're talking about an economic system that's called capitalism that benefits from all levels of oppression and creates different levels of oppression so that we fight each other rather than fight the economic system that is exploiting all of us. And so when we talk about white supremacy, when we talk about patriarchy, let us not forget ever to talk about capitalism as the economic system and the very root of what our problems are. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us and also the work that you're doing. And we're going to be having lunch. We're going to take a little bit of a break. And then some good old folks called the program, the open program, their open program, we met and we fell in love. So we're courting right now. Next thing you know, I'll be a theater singer type of thing. They're awesome. They're going to be doing an intervention right after lunch, and so please stay with us. We're going to be having workshops also after the intervention. The open program is a long, long name that we will share with you, but the open program, and they're working out of the Andrew Freeman Homes at in the Bronx, where I'm from. But let us get up and let's do a little chanting, because I don't know, I just feel like I need to chant. So I like call and responses, because I'm a church girl too, believe it or not. Hip hop is a way of preaching too. So when I say people, you say power. When I say people, you say power. People, power. People, power. When I say we want, you say freedom. We want freedom. We want freedom. We want freedom. That was a warm up. Y'all need to get more into it. When I say people, you say power. People, power. People, power. People, power. People, power. Freedom! We want freedom! We want freedom! We want freedom! All right, I kind of believe you. So by the end of the day, we're going to get this. Enjoy lunch, speak with each other, build, and we'll be coming back for the open program. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'd like to hug y'all before y'all get to your...
I'm just going to...
You're based here.
I'm based here, yeah. We're in Harlem.